Hello and welcome to another Smart Mobility Body of Knowledge Masterclass. My name is Kevin Boris, joined as ever by Bob McQueen. How are you doing, Bob?
Doing good, Kevin. Happy to be here in the south of France and
Yes,
happy to be talking with you and Steve. Looking forward to it.
this should be an interesting session. So our masterclass, if you haven't seen the previous one, our masterclass sessions are basically we're chatting to people who are experts in specific subjects in the smart mobility and ITS worlds. Today, our subject is road user charging, and we have an undoubted expert in the subject in Steve Morello. Hello, Steve. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, no, thank you for accepting the invitation. Otherwise, it'd be a bit of a blank screen. So, Steve,
Okay.
Steve is well, you're the founder of Milestone Solutions, and Steve is now with co-founder. You're correct. I'm sorry. Sorry for your co-founders. Apologise to the other guys. And now with CDM Smith, Steve has a long career in the road user charging sector. Now, Steve and I first met back in 1999 when you were at Group Aegis, when you were there for many years. Again, in the south of France. It's coincidental that you're also at some point based in south of France. You're not now, of course. But we're talking about road user charging. It's been one of those subjects that has always been on the agenda for the since I've been involved in the ITS and smart mobility sector, which is from 1999. Always covered road user charging. There's always been schemes coming and going. There's a lot of discussion about whether of fairness, road pricing based on fairness, road pricing based on mileage. We're going to talk about that now. But Steve, what can we ask the first question here is in terms of road user charging across the world, what do you see as the biggest current opportunities in that sector for the world? What is kind of ripe for picking, if I can use that phrase?
Right for picking. Well, first of all, I think you have to define what you mean by road usage charging.
Well, let's do that then.
Okay. The first thing is we always make clear that road usage charging is not tolling. Tolling is point-based, whether it be a bridge or a tunnel or section, or even sometimes a network-based. Let me give you an example. In Germany, they have distance-based charging for trucks on 50,000 kilometers of the roads. That is not road usage charging. It is road usage charging on a limited section of the entire road network. Road usage charging is basically all roads network wide, every single road. And basically today, most places that are looking at implementing distance-based charging for light vehicles, and that's kind of the focus, is to replace a gas tax that's dwindling as we shift the vehicle fleet to highly fuel-efficient vehicles, EVs, plug-in hybrids, and hybrids. That's my definition of road usage charging, basically related to the European Union user pays principle. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but one of the topics that always crops up: mileage-based user fees, MBUF. So
that's the same term of distance-based charging. We use that as kind of it's what we say on both sides of the United States. Kind of, you have different terminology. On the Eastern Seaboard, it's kind of become common to be RUC or mileage-based user fees, almost because there's an alliance called the MBUFA Alliance or MBUFA, Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, and it was created about 10 years ago. But out west in places like California and Oregon and Washington and even Utah, they tend to just use the acronym RUC or qualify it as distance-based charging today for light vehicles. We don't touch trucks very much in the US.
So Steve, will it only be distance-based or will it take account of when you travel, where you travel, and the kind of vehicle you've got?
I like that question a lot because I always revert back to about the year 2000. And when the Lorry Road User Charging Project was being procured, I think the Brits got it very well, what they call it time, distance, place, which is basically time of day, the distance you travel, and the actual physical location. The only way that can be done is if you have every single vehicle equipped with some sort of device that allows, even if it's anonymous, allows to know where those vehicles are, and they can be charged based on their actual physical location. The only place in the world that that's actually being done is the deployment of GNSS for all vehicles in Singapore, because they can mandate, and the word I'm using is mandating. Right now, a lot of places are not looking at mandating what we call ubiquitous onboard units, where you'd retrofit every vehicle. What we're looking forward is a slow transition where eventually 99% of all vehicles will already be equipped with some sort of OEM capabilities to report distance charging, whether it be only distance or whether it be time, distance, place, as I just defined. It's really up to the place where it is, and privacy issues. It's a huge issue, is how you deal with privacy. And so in many places we say, look, let's just replace a gas tax with an aggregated distance for vehicles like they have in Utah and Oregon, optional right now, not mandated. And if you're not mandated, you don't have to do anything about enforcement. That'll come when you start having mandated. But let's who has an account doing distance-based charging in 2 operational programs in the US, they vehicle also are sensitive to equity and fairness issues, and they're willing to pay a little bit to drive on the roads.
Sure. Okay. So getting back to my original question, not that you haven't answered it, but in terms of can we list locations? Can you give us some countries, cities that are ideal opportunities for road user charging schemes?
Well, yeah, the example I like to give, if you can go on both sides of the Atlantic, you have the operational programs in the US, and we don't need to talk about them, they're voluntary. But then you just look at what's beginning to happen in places like the Netherlands and Switzerland, where in the Netherlands, they are now at over €2 a liter. And if you calculate that in current US dollars, can you imagine what an American would say to somebody who said, now you're going to be paying $9 for a gallon of gas? When in my lifetime, it's never been over 4. Okay. And whenever it's been 4, that's when politicians start having the ropes being thrown over the trees to lynch them. So the point I'm making is in Europe, you have a different perspective on it. And I've been talking to people in Switzerland. Do you realize that they've lost from 5.2 billion Swiss francs in 2008? They're down to annual revenues of about 4.1 billion Swiss francs. The Netherlands is having the same impact. And let's not even talk about Norway, which has seen it. So the way I describe it is the fiscal cliff of transition to EVs is more steep in Europe, because it's very dramatic in the amount of money that is generated each time somebody puts petrol in their car is 3 to 4 times more than in America in terms of gas taxes. So those gas taxes may not be hypothecated or dedicated to transit uses or transportation in Europe. And as those in France, I think the example is that tax revenues from petrol represent 10% of the government revenues. Imagine if that goes down to 5% in a few years. Everywhere that has a dependence on gas tax is ripe for changing to distance-based charging for light vehicles.
So Steve, the loss of revenue from gas tax, from petrol tax, would that have happened anyway because of the internal combustion engine getting more efficient? And is it simply that electric vehicles are making it happen faster?
Yes, I like to use the example of right now. I bought a hybrid, and we know that hybrids have been around for 20 years, and those hybrids are getting an average of twice as many miles per gallon, or they're consuming half as many liters per 100 kilometers as normal ICEs. And that slow trend began to accelerate around 10 years ago, which is one of the reasons why I'm currently working in the United States, because the pioneering spirit of the state of Oregon began to look at that. And it's like they had a crystal ball. They said, wait a minute, we got to do something about this. So they started studying it. And what they realized is that there's a slow demise of the gas tax. And the thing that's interesting is that in not many, I don't know which ones, but a lot of states in the US, they actually take out loans based on future revenues from gas tax.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is those loans are beginning to be jeopardized because the bondholders realize that the revenues are declining each year, despite some states where the Treasury says that they're going to go up. And then at the end of the year, they call it a computer glitch or the model had a glitch because they got wrong again. But you can only do that so many times before people realize that there's something actually going wrong here. The revenues are going down and they're not going to go up. So even bondholders and states that have borrowed money, they realize that going to a distance-based charge for all these fancy new vehicles and all these EVs that are not paying right now needs to happen. Because remember, I think we're up to 30 states in the US that actually charge an annual fee to have an EV, a plug-in electric vehicle, or even some have hybrid fees. Mm-hmm. And the point I'm saying is that is something that we're trying to get rid of in Europe, is these vignette-based, having no relationship to consumption, where I can have a Tesla and Bob can have a Tesla and you drive 2,000 miles a year and I drive 20 and we pay the same. So there's a real desire in states, and that's why Utah went into an operational system. We've got Virginia procuring it now. There's a number of states that look like they're going to go to this opt-in to get the system up and running for a small segment of the vehicle fleet that's growing rapidly. And I think is interesting to say is I've seen some really interesting presentations, and people who are very much in the know about the EV take-up say it is so staggering that we cannot wrap our hands around the accelerated pace. And we have no idea of how to forecast actual percentage of vehicles that will be non-ICEs even in 5 years, because every 6 months it's getting closer. And so the impact is more dramatic again in Europe, because so much money is charged per gallon or per liter in gas tax and taxes. That's got to be hurting. And so countries like Switzerland and Norway and Netherlands could be, in the vanguard of that. And then look at Brussels mobility pricing in the city center. That's an area. But again, that requires ubiquitous, abilities. I mean, every car needs to be able to have some sort of chip. Even though we know 95% have chips in them, but people have to authorize that, and privacy issues prevent anything like that now. But in the future, I think it will dissipate.
Well, so back in 2003, when London brought in its congestion charge, it was thought at the time, many articles written about it at the time, that London would be the first of many European cities that would bring in congestion charging. As soon as it proved to be a success and the congestion levels went down and the money was hypothecated, blah, blah, and all this kind of exciting futuristic idea of how cities can work, never really happened, did it? What do you think was the biggest challenge or barrier for other cities? I can name you 20 cities that I spoke to during that time that were going to implement a congestion charging scheme and didn't. Milan was one of them. Just came to mind. Got a great meeting with them. What stopped?
Well, I think part of it is I think we're having the same sense of deja vu in New York City. The point is New York City is implementing congestion charging, but it's gridlock in the city center. Yeah. And a lot of cities that have looked at congestion charging are not gridlock in the city center, like central London or like New York City. And remember, a key point is what we're learning is that education is a critical aspect of when you go out to the general public and you ask them through a referendum if they would like to have improved transit options or public transportation options and have people pay to drive into the cities, they tend to say no. Stockholm was a close call in terms of spending 200 million euros to put in a pilot that then was voted on. The point I'm making is the domino effect. It really depends. How many cities have gridlock in the central area, like London and even Stockholm to that extent, and in New York City? You look at the U.S. Chicago is doing studies. LA is studying it. San Francisco, but they have it from a different problematic, because the ebb and flows, the traffic congestion, like in Miami or LA, is on the freeways. It's not in the city center. So I mean, it really, and again, we've seen in the U.S. that the biggest problem is educating people of the need to do something about it. And part of the success of London is they've implemented all these express bus lanes and added capacity before they implemented the congestion charge. So people saw that the alternative to get out of the car was not going to get them back in the car, because let's not forget, in the UK, pricing of trains is done such that people are forced off of them.
Yes.
Okay?
Wow.
They don't do pricing of trains to increase capacity when there's an increased demand. They increase the prices so that people get off the trains and go back to their cars. So if you have that sort of philosophy of an integrated transportation network, like you do in some places where people are actually forced to go back to the car because it's too expensive to take the train, you're going to add to congestion.
Gotcha. Yeah. Bob, we were talking off air before we started recording about the link between road user charging and universal payment. Do you want to ask Steve that question? Because you worded that really nicely.
Well, I was just thinking, Steve, a little bit beyond, obviously we've got a challenge to get road user charging in place, but do you see it fits into a bigger picture of a universal payment system, one single, not one single payment instrument, but one single account for multiple modes of transportation?
Oh yeah, and I believe that Toyota would love for me to sign up for their pay for services, and I believe that anybody who's bought a Tesla would love for them to be, doing a pay for services,
Right.
Because pay for services means that you're paying a subscription. I pay for my iCloud, and they hit me up for $9.99 a month.
Right.
And any company that has recurrent revenue, when you work for a service supply company or even a toll agency, what you want is that recurring revenue. You want people to be having a subscription. So of course it's going to be going to that. And I believe that eventually, and we're beginning to see the wake up of some of the OEMs coming into the scene. And let me give you the example. In Utah, we have two types of users: those that have to set up an app on their phone, whether it be a smartphone, then they set up an account with the service provider, and that account is linked to that app. And then they have to go and order a dongle device. It gets sent to them in the mail. And they have to figure out, where does that dongle device go? I don't know where that is. They got to plug it into the dongle device, and they got to figure out how to pair it with their phone. Now compare all of the touch points and everything you have to do versus the few of them that are with Tesla. And they say, "Hi, Tesla. I'm in a project here in Salt Lake City, and we'd like you to send my aggregated distance traveled to this account manager every month. Thank you." Which is simpler. Set up an account with a service provider, and then you call your automobile, your OEM, the one that's got all your data anyway.
Yeah.
And then eventually that OEM, I think, is going to be a RUC aggregator, and then they're going to be providing you with, GLOSSA, green light optimization as you're traveling down the road. They're going to be providing you with, where are the parking spaces if you're going to be visiting a town and you're going to visit grandmother from one city to another in the same state, or if you're going out of state and then out of country, and you'll have a service provider that at the end of the month, if you're in an area where you do drive out of state, because where I live in Florida, I believe that in the next 5 years I live in Florida, I might take that car out of state once. Do you think I really need to have interoperability for one trip in 5 years? But people who live in areas where they're crossing borders all the time, there is this huge issue of maybe roaming charges. And I saw that in the European Union, they just extended roaming free charges for all of the cell phone providers in Europe for another number of years. They could do something like that for roaming. And then you could provide at the end of the month, you have, one account manager, you could have open systems, like I call the USA Eats program should be launched, for example, and things like that. That's rather futuristic, but my golly, if Europe can do it after 20 years, maybe the US could do it in another 20. Who knows?
Stranger things have happened at sea.
I don't know. I mean, I'm optimistic. I call myself, a person who really is I prophesize about the need for distance-based charging, and almost evangelical about it, because it's just part of my DNA. I think that we're all going to get there. I think some places are sooner than later. It's interesting to see how Europe was ahead in for trucks and the truck tolling schemes, because it's not all roads network-wide. None of them are. And the U.S. systems where they're slowly replacing the gas tax for these EVs, and people are accepting. Remember, in Utah, they had a take-up that really exceeded their expectations in the first year in terms of an opt-in program. So people are just anxious to learn what it's going to be about.
Steve, in your opinion, is the technology ready? Are we simply saying we can do whatever we want, we just have to agree what it is we want?
Well, I think the technology is ready, but as the vehicle fleets evolve to having OEMs getting more involved, I mean, you guys, I just bought a new car. I never bought a new car, and it's amazing what it has in it. They want you to pay for your internet service, and you could, it's got your 5G chips in it. And I was talking to somebody from Ford the other day at the ITS America conference. They said an average vehicle has like 300 chips in it. Did you guys know that?
Wow.
I had no idea.
I recently knew the figures. Yeah, it's incredible.
I mean, those figures are astounding when you think about it. That's a lot of technology shoved into a vehicle. And so the OEMs want to use it in any way that they could imagine. If they could get into processing RUC or parking or other pay for services, even in the Philippines, a former company I worked with on their Easy Trip Philippines platform, you could drive into McDonald's and get your McDonald's and have it paid for on your toll account. I mean, I'm just saying that the options are only limited by the brains that we have and the constraints of being in a box. If you're very open-minded, an OEM, just think of the opportunities there are for them. And let's not forget the DOTs, the national road operators.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever move to a mandated system, somebody's got to be able to put poles in the grounds and put the enforcement equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, you're not going to get an authorization to do that unless you go talk to the national road authorities or the DOTs, depending on where you are, or the ministries of transportation, whoever's in charge of that. They want to get involved. And so they're going to be transforming themselves from managing roads to being digital road operators. Look at all the information, the vehicle to infrastructure, the infrastructure out there. Do they want private entities to take over their traffic management, or do they want to get involved as the digitization of the entire intelligent highway becomes very prevalent? Are they going to get involved in that? I think they might. You look at the DOTs in the US, they're the ones that are running, and not the DOTs. We have, whichever organization or agency within a ministry or a department that collects the money, they're going to be involved, and so you have what you call the organizational framework. Where is it going to be housed? Because it's a new revenue system. Somebody's got to manage it on behalf of the government, or are they going to outsource it like a lot of toll agencies do? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. There's a slightly less exciting question to ask about. We're asking this question to all the masterclass participants, all the experts. Risk. We have to talk about risk management. How is risk managed in a road user charging scheme? Or what are the most important elements to manage?
Well, if you're doing the transition, scalability and public acceptance.
Yeah.
And I would actually flip that and say, I always talk to people, I say the problem with, converting or transitioning to distance-based charging, where every vehicle basically is assigned to an account. Whereas when you go and you're paying the gas tax, most people don't even know you put gas in it, and you get hit each time you put gas in it. But when you have an account, people are going to be more, an individual account for every vehicle is going to be a lot of overhead. And one of the biggest risk is that people get caught up in it's going to cost too much to change. And that is a common ostrich in the sand, with its head in the sand syndrome, where people believe that change is too costly. So therefore we just leave it as it is and raise a gas tax. And remember, as we raise a gas tax, it becomes more and more regressive, because as we know, the wealthier you are in terms of the socioeconomic ladder, the higher likelihood that you've already got a Tesla. Okay. And those Teslas and the new EVs coming out are not going to be what we'd say, demonstrably achievable in terms of the price for a lot of people right away. And the charging infrastructure is not there. If you don't live in a single family home, or live in a place where it's relatively easy to charge up your electric vehicle, you're kind of in a conundrum. You're stuck. You can't get one, because how do you charge it? So there's all of the infrastructure needs to go with it. And I just believe with distance-based charging, think about it. If everybody has an EV, say in 10 or 15 years, and the older EVs are living out further, and they're driving more and they're paying more because they're driving further. With the gas tax, that regressive tax cannot be modified. But if you have a distance-based charge, and you can have reduced transit fares for large families or families that have different economic status, with the distance charge, you can give them a rate that is a discount per mile. And so the regressiveness of the gas tax could be replaced with a very progressive tax that has an ability, but it means every vehicle needs to be equipped, and we will get there. Okay. We will get there, but it's not going to be tomorrow. But I love the notion of being a progressive tax or fee.
Yeah.
So customizable, I like that thought that because of the power of the information technology and the electronics, we can fine tune it. It doesn't have to be average anymore.
Yeah, and remember, we really always realized, and we never knew exactly how it would work, but we knew that these darn dongle devices were only a stopgap. It was to show that technology existed to do it. It wasn't terribly robust. Not all vehicles have OBD2 ports now, but as we're seeing the transition to onboard native automaker telematics that allow us to do that almost seamlessly, just think of the possibilities. It can be for usage-based insurance. It can be for moderating driving behavior. We're seeing a tick up in deaths in the United States. And I was at a conference. I mean, can you imagine egg on the face of all the authorities seeing the number of people dying on our highways only increasing to 38,000 from 36 or whatever it was? I mean, it's ridiculous to think that we're allowing that many people to die on our highways and not doing anything about it. Really, they're not doing anything about it in this country. I must admit, I can't ride my bicycle anywhere in Florida because all of the bike lanes were designed by people who don't ride bikes. Because if they rode a bike, they would be designed differently. Otherwise, they would know that they're just terribly dangerous and unsafe for any rider to even put their bicycle wheel in it. And these they're all over the place. And I talked to the executive director of the Florida DOT, and you know what his answer was? Local decisions.
Right.
Well, yeah. The point.
Imagine there's no safety regulations in this state of Florida for bicycle path design to protect people from getting run over. And now we're getting a huge tick up in people riding bicycles, and therefore more people dying because they're using unsafe facilities. I ride a bike. I won't put my bicycle on any lane in the state of Florida, ever, within vehicular traffic. It's just so
that is ridiculous. I wasn't
that was
aware
a
of
bit
that.
of a digression. Sorry. But
No. It's a good digression because Bob, you obviously recently moved from Florida. You probably need the same thing. I'm obviously living in the UK and I don't cycle, so it's not something that ever comes in my head. Can we talk about there's certain phrases in the business world that drive me nuts? Business models. For some reason, that phrase I never like it, but it's an important question to ask. So in terms of business models, if we're looking at things like zonal pricing, cordon crossing, whatever, what is the business model roughly the same, or is there different elements to think about with each scheme, or each type of scheme?
Well, I mean, if you look at whether it be like cordon or congestion pricing, we all know that if they're implemented correctly, they make tons of money. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at the London scheme and remember I always like to use the saying that it all depends on what level of effectiveness you want. Okay. And to what level you can raise the price to impact behavior. Okay. And some places have it. So for example, in Miami, where they have managed lanes, the effectiveness has been completely destroyed by the fact that they cap the toll, so that the toll rate is not significant enough to keep the traffic flow conditions on the managed lanes flowing. And so there are certain periods of the day where it just becomes complete bottleneck, stop and go traffic at less than 10 or 20 miles an hour. And people are spending, $10 to drive on that road. Whereas you look at Washington, D.C., where they have sections that are $40. And I tell you, at $40, they maintain free flow conditions.
Yeah. Yes, go on. Bob, do you have a point on business models?
Well, I think look at the London experience, where they were smart enough to match the business model to the technology constraints. They use license plate readers, which are 75%, 80% accurate. But instead of making it cordon crossing, they make it zone presence. And they've since discovered, after they put the system in place, that there's 11 possible opportunities on average to find the license plate inside the zone. That increases the probability. So I guess one of the lessons is just matching the business model to the technology you adopted. And, Steve, I guess to your point, how do we avoid equipping all vehicles? And that's how they avoided it, by making it a license plate recognition system rather than a transponder.
For cordon or zonal, we realize today that the technology is very robust, and the whole notion of being in a zone and having roving cameras and and an average vehicle getting a picture taken, half a dozen or even a dozen times is what increases the reliability. When you're talking about the business model for replacing the gas tax, what we say again, network wide, all roads. Basically, the business model is not very strong. For example, in the state of Utah, the director of the Utah Department of Transportation basically said that the current system they have will start breaking even around 2025 because it's more of a trial. It's optional. It's something where they're propping it up because they want to demonstrate that where it can go. And the whole idea in every single system, and I believe that if you have competition among service providers, like in the EATS model, we could get down the operational costs, so the APEX that would be going to the service providers at less than 5%. But it's going to take a while because you're going to need to have zillions of cars subject to the charge. Right now, any toll road is between 10 and 20% because they have a lot of other overhead. But if you're just collecting for distance charging, and you can do it every year when you go to register your vehicle. I like to use the example of Washington State. In the state of Washington, they have what they call licensing agencies, and they're both public and private. And it doesn't really matter. You go in there to update your vehicle and get your vehicle registered for the next year. They charge you $100 or whatever it is. But you know what you have to do before you can get your license sticker for the next year? You have to do three things. One, you have to show that you owe no tolls in the state of Washington. You have to show that you owe no traffic fines or parking tickets. Mm-hmm. Number three, you have to prove that you have to not be listed on a person who owes child support.
Right.
Why not add RUC? As a fourth? People working in these agencies said we could easily do that. Have you paid your RUC? Have you paid your tolls? So the thing is there's even a sort of a embedded way of doing enforcement.
Right. So that account, and I guess there is an account per vehicle with these driver and vehicle license and databases. Would that be a suitable place to start in terms of bringing in an RUC account?
Well, yes, it could. And the toll industry is very interested in that. I like the example of London. London, unlike New York City, is going to use EasyPass because there's only 13 million of them available.
Right.
But they're also going to do ANPR, automatic number plate recognition systems, for those that aren't. And so do we really want to be equipping vehicles with these 20-year-old transponders? Mm-hmm. Why not just go with the OEMs?
Right.
At some point, the transponder industry is going to be dying, I think. I don't know. They might use them for enforcement, or you could have a DSRC chip in your vehicles, and many of them do now. And
right.
So, we all know that the German truck tolling system became interoperable with Austria after a number of years. But from day one, they had DSRC chips in those 500 euro units that they put in all the tens of or several hundred thousand trucks in Germany. That started us down a road that was magnificent. It was a white elephant from day one, but it proved that it could be done, and somebody did it. And the Germans had the gumption to do it. And we're all benefiting from that investment today in one way or another.
Yep.
I share your view on life, Steve. Pretty optimistic about things. I think you maybe have to be in this industry. But I did have a dark thought, and that is, are we enabling politicians to tax anything that moves?
Guess what? Of course we are. That's what it's all about. Politicians and governments have three words that resonate. It's called get the money.
Yep.
If you're losing money on one end, the gas tax is a dinosaur. It's dying.
Yep.
Government cannot live without having sustainable revenue sources. We're not here to tax people to death. Right. We're here so that, the do-gooders that are buying EVs with these massive subsidies recognize that they need to be paying their fair share to drive on the roads. Right. Do you realize that in the UK, the Tesla is the vehicle that's driven the most miles per year? And can you imagine how much difference it is to drive 10,000 miles in the UK or 10,000 kilometers on an EV versus driving it on a ICE? If you have a Porsche or something. And then somebody in the Netherlands mentioned that the energy prices have doubled, but what, it went from a 10 €1 a kilometer in the Netherlands for an EV to €2. I don't know. I mean, the point I'm making is you can double electricity, but electricity is, in terms of the power and the use of it for EVs, I don't know the exact quotient, but they're much more energy efficient in terms of transforming energy to propulsion than an ICE. And the point I'm making is, I still don't see how, even if electricity prices double in some places, that could be dissuasive to driving an EV, because if you can afford it, because it's so much cheaper than, $9 a gallon, €2 a liter, that's a lot.
I was going to ask you about equity, but from what we've been talking about, it sounds to me that the current situation is not very equitable.
Well, anybody who can afford a Porsche today, it's still not equitable.
Right.
Anybody who can afford a Porsche today can afford to pay, spending 10 liters or 20 liters to go 100 kilometers, and they whip out their card, their platinum cards, and they're fine. People who are very well off, impacts like that don't hit them. My daughter, who is a non-commissioned officer in the French military, Gendarmerie Nationale, indicated that today they're having fines in France that are income-based. Now, that might be an interesting way of doing it. Imagine that you had a distance-based charge for people who own Teslas based on their income. So they could be spending, 80 cents a mile or 80 cents a kilometer. And, somebody who has a lower income could be spending 1 penny a mile. Right. Wow, I don't know if that'd go over well. But the point I'm saying is equity is there. And as time goes on, remember, those Priuses are 20 years old and they're still running. Very reliable. The EVs, secondhand market, is going to begin to ramp up as there's more of them. In the US alone, I think there's going to be like 15 or 20 models on sale next year. Those vehicles will be used vehicles in 5 years.
I've raised another question in my mind, which is, is this going to be mobility management in the future, or is it wealth redistribution?
I think it'll be both.
Yeah.
We've already had the wealth redistribution throughout my lifetime. So, I don't know if we're going to stem the tide of that.
Right.
I mean, wealth redistribution to the top end.
Right.
Yeah.
So I sell all my possessions and get rid of the car and then just travel. Well, not even get rid of the car, just travel cheap because I don't have any money.
Yeah. If being mobile and having the ability to travel is a right, then that's also equitable. I was going to ask. I had a discussion about, it must be 3 weeks ago, with someone about dynamic insurance. Where does that fit in with the whole road user charging or mileage-based user charging picture, or doesn't it?
Well, it does and it doesn't. The main distinction is if you're using usage-based insurance or insurance that is based on your usage or your behavior, you're signing up to that voluntarily. And the distance travel is not that important. It's not something that you're paying a fee for per mile. The point I'm making is, right now, you don't have a choice of paying to drive, to pay your gas tax. When we go to a distance-based charge, it should be mandated. So you're going to be paying it. And because it's a fee, it needs to be accurate. And so there's issues of accuracy of the distance charging and the odometer and the tampering issues. And there's a whole range of issues. Remember, let's make it clear. To date, except for New Zealand, which is a unique case, they started a paper-based system decades ago. The two operational systems in Oregon and Utah have not dealt with the enforcement aspects because they are optional. I always look at it as going back to the lower road user charging as the time, distance, place, where you had the 3 pillars. You had the central services, the data services, and you had the enforcement services, the 3 silos. In my opinion, today, we've dealt effectively with everything about how to manage the back office, about how to equip the vehicles. We see that it's easier with the OEMs and blah, blah. But we haven't even begun to crack the nut about enforcement. That's where we're still open about what are the national roads authorities or the departments of transportation, how are they going to get involved in this transportation of autonomous vehicles and connected and AV vehicles, and how are they going to be running on the roads, and what sort of, striping do they need? I was recently at a conference where, Xerox, or no, excuse me, 3M is pretty interested in the future because they're going to need special striping and paints and things that, maybe have, chips in them so that they can be detected even through snow and ice. Who knows? I mean, we're only limited by the brains that we have. Okay. And people are thinking of pretty cool stuff in the future.
Yep. Now, that was something we discussed maybe 2 years ago, of dynamic road marking paint that has an element in it that detects when the temperature is low, and the paint heats up and melts the snow so you can see the road marking.
Can you imagine?
Not genius.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, this isn't like fantasy. This is happening. This will be on the market within probably 2 years. Extraordinary stuff. And pavements that eat smog and then save the energy that's used and then put it back into the network. That's to me, that is just mind-boggling. I don't know how on earth you would even start to think of that. But that kind of stuff is revolutionizing what we've been talking about for 20 odd years, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure has.
So Steve, you mentioned at the beginning quite clearly, and I agree with you, that RUC is not the electronic toll collection. There's a different set of objectives, a different set of business models. But do you think there's a bunch of people currently involved in electronic toll collection who might have some expertise that can help us with RUC?
Oh yeah, I especially I look at certain similarities in terms of the silos and the expertise you need. If we do sort of a broad range of implementation or conversions from gas tax to distance-based charging, you actually know, let's make it clear that a French company is a service provider for the Utah system.
Yeah.
And the French company is a toll service operator. I believe that some of them could get caught up by just the sheer size of it. And so we're seeing small companies like Panasonic and Toshiba and companies like Deloitte joining American-based mileage-based user fee alliance. And those small companies, Deloitte's only 300,000 employees worldwide. They do a lot of, back office management for DMVs and all kinds of really huge IT programs. So I do believe that we're going to see a lot of competition. We're going to see a lot of interest in how it will shake up, whether it be open systems and open architecture, whether or not it'll be run and operated by the states. I think that could be a risk, because you could then have the silos like you've had with interoperability of tolling in the US. And the only reason why it's really been an issue in the US is mostly for trucks. Light vehicles have some issues in the Eastern Seaboard, but then they developed Easy Pass. I don't need to go down that road, but here's a point I wanted to make. We've seen a massive conversion or even implementation of all electronic tolling. All electronic tolling means you have to deal with accounts, you have to deal with, with your customers, and you have to deal with interfacing with them, and you have to deal with, the payment mechanisms. And I just said is exactly what you'd have to do with an account-based system for distance-based charging. So yes, the answer is yes. There's an incredible amount of expertise from companies that have gotten involved in that conversion process or even straight deployment. And the thing is there's a lot of expertise in how to use what I call UX. This is a really important element. User interface. Again, I like to use my example of bicycle lanes in the state of Florida. It's obvious that nobody who's ever designed a single bicycle lane in the state of Florida actually rides a bike. Otherwise, they would be designed differently. If you want to design systems for people to have account-based systems for using for distance-based charging, do what we did in Hawaii. They had 14 community-based meetings where they went and met people face to face and answered hard questions, and they dealt with it. And you do with the outreach and the education. You explain it. All electronic tolling, there's a lot of public outreach that was done to when you're implementing a toll system in a place that never had it before, like when they implemented all electronic tolling on the 520 in Seattle when I was living there. Huge outreach campaigns, and there's a lot of knowledge on how to teach the public, educate the public. Again, I go back to the word that's repeated 3 times about distance-based charging: educate, educate, educate.
Right.
Without that, I always say somebody cannot be convinced of the need to pay by the mile until they actually understand how they pay now.
Right.
Remember, 95% of people, when they ask, how do you pay to drive on your roads today? They do not know that it's via gas taxes. They cannot spontaneously answer that. Until 95% of the people can spontaneously answer that question, we are stuck with the need to educate.
Well, you know, they think it's free, right?
I like that word. I like to quip the saying that the biggest problem we have in the United States of America is a person who called a highway a freeway made a big.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's, you know, the expressway is better. Yeah. The tollway, the New York tollway. I mean, any word besides freeway, it was better, because how do you, and remember, in the United States, you can't toll actual interstate highways.
Right.
And so there's a big, you know, need to look at how they could be doing something electronically. And there's been some successes and failures in that way, but I don't want to go into a long digression. Any more questions?
Kevin, any more questions?
No, I think we've got a long list of questions and we've pretty much ticked them all off.
Well, I just want to make a comment. You make me smile. Twice now you've said, I want to get a hold of the person that designed the bike lanes, because he obviously doesn't ride a bike. You know, my wife likes to cook. She's very good at it. She said that about multiple kitchen designs. This was a guy that designed this who didn't know how to cook. I've also had to remind her that most of the best chefs in the world are men, particularly in France. But, you know,
yeah, it's like when you talk to Rachel Cahill, who wrote a book on designing transportation for women, and anybody talking about it. I was at a conference last week, and it was Mobility XX at ITS America. Mobility XX is a rebranding of women in transportation. And one of the things they said is the problem with transportation is we all, as more and more women are getting involved in leadership roles in transportation, they're beginning to realize that all these transportation modes and the terminals and the escalators and even the restrooms were designed by men, and they never had any women's input into them. They're not accommodating to women's travel needs, whatever those are, and you know, the UX.
Okay, so thanks to Steve Morello for his time. Thanks to Bob as well. My name is Kevin Boris. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you've learnt a lot about the road user charging sector, about the technologies and the politics and policy involved. Whether you're just getting into the sector, whether you're new to the sector, studying it, or you're an expert yourself, hopefully you've garnered some knowledge you didn't previously have. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch up with you again, or you'll catch up with us again very soon. Thank you.
Ciao. See you.